Welcome back to the Launch Michigan podcast. I'm Emily Fishkin, the Senior Communications Manager here at Launch Michigan. This week, we're excited to share a podcast version of our March 2026 Research Roundup webinar, Why Michigan Needs the Michigan Education Guarantee. This webinar has been edited slightly to fit the podcast format and may differ from previous presentations. If you're interested in learning more about the Michigan Education Guarantee, please visit our website at launchmichigan.org. Let's get started.
I'm Venessa Keesler. I'm the president and CEO of Launch Michigan. I'm a career educator. I started as a classroom teacher, teaching 7th grade social studies out in Massachusetts, but most of my experience has been at the state or national policy level. I worked at the U.S. Department of Education with a national education firm, and many of you know me from my time at the Michigan Department of Education. I was deputy superintendent there for about 10 years. So I'm excited to be here at Launch, and we are very excited about this work, and we can't wait to share with you more of the research base behind it. Launch Michigan is a cross-partisan nonprofit organization that includes education, business, labor, and philanthropy. And our goal is to reimagine Michigan's public education system and make sure every student is prepared for success after high school. When I say education, business, labor, I'm talking about the Michigan Education Association, the Michigan Association of School Administrators, the Community College Association. For business, we have Business Leaders for Michigan, the Small Business Association of Michigan, the Detroit Regional Chamber, and several other independent businesses. We have the Operating Engineers 324 for labor, and we are supported by a wealth of philanthropic partners who obviously support the work financially, but also support with thought leadership and engagement. The big promise of Launch is that we bring together unlikely partners to solve the problems facing our education system and to do it collaboratively, not competitively. So how do we succeed in Michigan? A system solution to a system problem. We know that for us to succeed in education and in Michigan, we have three big components that have to be there. We have to have adequate and equitable funding. I remember sitting in the state boardroom around 2014, 2015, and listening to the debate. And the debate was, do we need more money in education? Does money even matter? And that was a legitimate question that this state was wrestling with. Turns out the answer is yes, money matters a lot, both more money, but also money distributed equitably, paying attention to meeting student needs, and toward evidence-based practices. So we need adequate and equitable funding 100% to have a successful system. We also need a high school diploma anchored in the future and in what students need, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then we need a system of shared accountability and responsibility, and we'll dive into that a little bit today, but for us to be successful as a state, we all play a role, we all play a part, and we need to recognize that and have that be part of the overall system solution. Today, we're really going to dive into the Michigan Education Guarantee and the research and evidence base behind it, but I want to take you on a brief journey. For some of you, you might think, this MEG work, it just started, it came out of nowhere, what's happening? We have been at this for a number of years. So just a brief little time travel for all of you. Back in 2021, Launch Michigan looked at the data, we looked at the evidence, we looked at what other states and nations do, and we said, we need to make sure Michigan students are graduating with a meaningful high school diploma. That is a key component of a successful system. Fast forward a couple of years, Governor Whitmer pulls together the Growing Michigan Together Council, another cross-sector, cross-partisan group that examined data and evidence and what states and nations are doing, and said, one of the things Michigan needs to do to grow our population and succeed as a state in terms of our education system is we need to commit to the Michigan Education Guarantee. Every Michigan student graduating with the future-ready skills and competencies needed for work and life. That was 2023. Now, two cross-partisan, cross-sector groups have looked at the same information and come to the same conclusion. The time for studying the issue is past. We need to actually dig in and say, well, what does that really mean? What does it look like? So we started on that journey in early 2024 as a coalition with our MEG champions. We built the MEG playbook. I would call that the 10,000-foot view, kind of putting more meat on the bones around what could the diploma look like? What other commitments do we need around funding? What are the commitments around this shared responsibility? And then we said, step one is the grad standard itself. We need to really unpack what it means to redefine what a diploma means, and we need to turn that into legislation that can replace the Michigan Merit Curriculum. So that brings us to today. Today, we really want to talk more about the evidence base for change. We have been building the MEG legislation, but the journey to get here has been many years and is very much rooted in evidence and data and the lived experience of educators. We've gotten a lot of really great questions, people saying, what problem are we trying to solve? What is the data behind it? What's the research? What do we know about the current standards? What do we know about why these components work together? Every component of the MEG is built on evidence. The rationale for coming into the MEG is based in evidence. So putting it all together, we appreciate the questions that came from all of you about, well, where's this all coming from? It gave us a chance to take all the data that we swim in all the time and pull it together and share with you. We also have all of this in a lovely white paper. I'm going to go through highlights here, but there's even more good details in the white paper. Sometimes when we talk about evidence or research, we mean peer-reviewed research that meets those high standards of scientific evidence, has been through the peer review process, and there is peer-reviewed research behind this work. There's also data that explains where things are, not necessarily in the form of research, but just raw data, numbers, facts. We use a number of surveys and polls, engagement data, things where we're asking employers, students, or somebody asked employers, students, parents, what do you need? What do you care about? What do you see? We tap into the evidence in learning and brain science, and we look at the exemplars from other states. So all of that is data, it's evidence, it's research. It pulls together the evidence base for change. We ground it in the lived experiences of educators and students as well. This policy is built on data and evidence, but it's also built on people who are in the system talking about what works and what doesn't. And that's a critical part. The way research and evidence works, not every solution has been studied to the point that you have peer-reviewed research or something that reaches that highest level of evidence. But that doesn't mean that it's not true. When a leader says, this is a problem I have with the pupil accounting manual, or when a teacher says, this is a constraint I feel in the classroom, those are real things that we need to build into policy. And so the MEG intentionally privileges and elevates that kind of data and research into the policy development. Why the MEG? Why now? We know this, and I have to say, my educator friends, I know that we are a little tired of hearing about our performance as a state. I do understand that. So I'm not going to belabor the point. But when you ask the question, why did we ever start saying we need a new diploma standard? We need to rethink what it means to graduate in the state. One of the big reasons is because of our performance. So we know this student performance is lagging. And beyond that, employers and post-secondary partners report that graduates really are not prepared for their next steps. We know this too. Absenteeism is high. It's nearly 30% of our students in this state are absent more than 10% of the year, 10% of the instructional days. That is a very high rate in the country, actually. Michigan is leading in chronic absenteeism, which is not something we necessarily want to lead in. And Michigan's population is declining. So we know this from the Population Council. Having education as an engine that not only prepares and trains and supports people to stay in the state, but attracts people from other states to come here and attracts business here is critical for our state's economic and social health, really. Again, we don't love these stats, but they are pretty consistent from 2024 to 2025. We dropped in the consumer affairs ranking from 23rd to 37th. In an analysis done by Launch Michigan in 2024, in our dashboard, we found when we compared districts to similar districts who look the same demographically as them in top performing states, we found that most of our districts do worse than their national comparison districts in math, 7 out of 8. 70% of Michigan districts underperformed in reading compared with similar districts in top performing states, and 71% underperform on graduation rates. So sometimes when we talk about change, it can be easy to think, well, it's just some districts, it's just some schools. Unfortunately, the facts are that it's not. It is a systems problem. So that's why at launch, we talk about systems solution, not about finding the individuals or the one place where it's not going well, but that to have this kind of performance systemically as a state, there's something going on that we need to fix at the systems level. Despite a dramatic investment and a lot of work at the post-secondary level to try to lower the cost of post-secondary education and increase attainment, Michigan is still last in the Midwest in terms of the percentage of our adults with a post-high school education. This data will be very familiar to people. And again, I'm not going to belabor it, but we have to say 73% of our high school students are not meeting the college and career readiness benchmark in 2024-25. That's on the SAT. And I know one of the common criticisms of these benchmarks is, well, the SAT has issues. A standardized test does not capture everything that a student knows. It's a different bar. Kids weren't motivated to take it. Those are all accurate, right? Let's do this as a thought exercise. Let's say that some percentage of this is wrong, right? Like kids are ready. They just hate the SAT. They didn't care. Let's even say 23% is just error. That would still leave half of our kids not meeting this benchmark. And again, it is only one data point, but we just have to grapple with the fact that our kids aren't getting to where we want them to go, despite a lot of hard work by educators and parents and students. Our SAT performance in 2025 is not excellent, not where we need it to be. I know people don't love to talk about rankings, and we don't love to talk about the NAEP rankings. The issue with NAEP rankings, I'm just going to put on my psychometric hat for a minute, is that a lot of the rankings are misnomers. There's states that you just can't tell if they're higher or lower than the average statistically. Again, I would ask us to invite some whimsy, some wonder in here in terms of reading. Let's say 44th isn't exactly where we are. Let's say we're better than that. None of these rankings in 2024 are anywhere near the top 10 or even the top half. So again, I am personally tired of arguing about, are we 44th? Are we 41st? Are we 32nd? All of those aren't number 1 or 2 or 5. And that's where I think we want our state to be. Academically, we want better for our students and for our state. We also know that we have equity issues. We've had this for a long time and it has persisted. So our literacy disparities, Michigan ranks in the bottom 5 states nationally for 4th grade reading for Black students. Nearly 2/3 of Black students attend schools where 73% or more of students are economically disadvantaged compared to only 13% of white students. If you're like, wow, it's a lot of bad news. When you go to the doctor and you get your blood work, when the news is bad, that's usually when the behavior changes start. So I know I'm showing you a lot of bad data or data that's not easy to see, but this is why need for change is so compelling. How are our graduates feeling? There was a survey done in 2025 by UScience. 72% of high school graduates surveyed reported feeling only moderately, slightly, or not at all prepared for life after high school. 70% of students do not feel confident in their post-graduation plans. Students aren't feeling connected to their futures. They're not sure where they're going or how they're going to get there. And 14% of male respondents and 8% of female respondents reported having absolutely no plan after high school. Teachers want something different. We participated in a day-long design thinking session with over 100 teachers from around the state. And the design thinking they were doing, when asked to design their perfect schools, there was so much consistency, and so many of the group came forward with things like, we need more flexibility in how the day is put together. We need more time to do things like life skills, applied learning, project, experiential learning. We need a clearer connection to the community and to business in our area and to the economy. Clubs are important. Extracurriculars are important. Those help students connect to their future. We need more time, space, and an explicit understanding that school needs to be about that as well. They talked a lot about the importance of authentic demonstrations of learning. One test, one day feels limiting to understand where a student really is, and the importance of students being able to authentically demonstrate what they're learning in a variety of ways. And then they talked a lot about how important it is to be able to adjust and personalize pathways or options for students and to have that flexibility in the structure of their day to do that. Okay, so why all of this? This is all data, right? So why did we land on changing diploma requirements as part of helping reinvent the system? When you raise the rigor that makes up what the diploma calls for or what the diploma is, it allows us to anchor the improvement in the rest of the system. So if we say this is the bar that students have to reach by the time they graduate from the system, where do they have to be in 10th grade? Where do they have to be in 8th grade? Where do they have to be in elementary school? How do we start to build those skills in a continuum? That is always how diplomas have worked or been meant to work in some way. It's how our content standards work too. So it's why making sure that end goal is accurately pointing toward the future and represents what is needed is so important. That helps you back map the system and align to it. When we ensure that the diploma is meaningful and is anchored in the skills and knowledge that students need for the future, our graduation rates will represent that true preparedness, and we'll be able to monitor if the system is preparing kids to get there or not. Let me just go through a quick what's wrong with our current diploma at a high level. Some of this is about how it's been implemented or how the laws that go along with the merit curriculum work. The merit curriculum says what are the requirements, but there's other laws like seat time, how students count for money, educator certification, other laws and rules that intersect with the merit curriculum requirements. So to blame it all on the poor merit curriculum might be a bit of a misnomer. But what's wrong with what we do now? Right now, the diploma is largely based on seat time. Students are not required to demonstrate mastery of skills, abilities, knowledge in order to graduate. They have to show up enough to pass classes, and then that's how you get to graduation. The whole kind of course-based, credit-based model, it's over 100 years old. It assumes one size fits all. And it's not just our state that does this. This is how school's been done for a really long time, right? Kids take classes and get credit for classes and go on. We know that is limiting. One size does not fit all. We also know that economic futures are changing and the available and credit-based student pathways, what we have now doesn't always match where students are going. So we have this very modern, evolving economy. And then we have a preparation system that looks much like what it looked like when many of you were in school, or when your parents or grandparents, or maybe even great-grandparents were in school. Schools and districts face difficulties integrating meaningful career-focused experiences into high school. We've heard this over and over and over and over when we talk to partners, when we talk to schools. We want to provide these opportunities to kids, but it's hard. We can't figure out how to do it. There's these barriers, et cetera, et cetera. But we also know that those career-focused experiences are really important for kids. And then we know that the promise of the merit curriculum was to reduce racial, economic, and geographic disparities. They still persist. Again, this is not all the fault of the poor merit curriculum. Education has not solved how to deal with disparities. And we need to be honest about that and ask at this moment, how can this policy move us further into ensuring those equitable, high positive outcomes for all students? To dig into the MNC just a little bit more, when the merit curriculum was started back in the early 2000s, I myself, when I was a young, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed grad student at Michigan State, one of the first research projects I did was studying whether or not we had a sufficient teacher supply to meet the demands of the Michigan merit curriculum back when I was a little whippersnapper running around with my data models and my data sets. When the merit curriculum was designed, they worked with all these post-secondary institutions, and they said, what classes do you expect students to have to be successful at four-year university? So it is really anchored in understanding what it takes to go to post-secondary education, specifically four-year university. As we saw before, however, despite the merit curriculum really being designed for this four-year college journey, we still are at only 53% of our students enrolling in post-secondary education within 16 months of graduation, leaving 47% not doing the thing that this is supposed to prepare them for. Even for that 53%, we know that we're just not getting where we need to go in terms of post-secondary education, despite investment and despite policy work under Governor Whitmer. Additionally, the University of Michigan studied the merit curriculum and really found no impacts of the merit curriculum. There was worry it would negatively impact graduation rate. It didn't do that, but also they didn't find positive impact of the merit curriculum. The other thing to know is that the line between college and career is gone. So this idea of training for your future is training for your future. There's been a lot of talk of, well, I could go into a trade or I could go to community college, but that's actually not true. When you go to a registered apprenticeship, when you get that additional post-secondary training, that is post-secondary education. That is important training, education, advancement. We need to think more broadly about what kids are prepared to do, what skills and knowledge are needed, because that's what the economy looks like. It's less of a bifurcation or one outcome. Education Reimagined did a survey of parents, and they found parents overwhelmingly want more for their kids beyond academic. They want career and technical education. They want dual enrollment, art, sports, and summer learning. Imagine this. Every student who enters high school has this personal education plan that fits their needs and goals. Rigorous, high-quality academics are blended with opportunities to apply those skills in the real world. No student graduates without demonstrating that they can read, write, and do math. But there's a lot of help for those who struggle, and we don't wait till high school to start seeing if kids are on track. This, for those of you who don't know, would be a dramatic increase in rigor for our current diploma. A current diploma does not require mastery or demonstrated outcomes in order to graduate. This is where the increased rigor really comes in. Students are regularly connecting with the workforce locally and globally, and every student completes a capstone project, this portfolio of learning that helps them have those meaningful, authentic demonstrations of what they've learned. Pivoting into the graduation standard legislation we're working on and the evidence base behind it. There are four big components of the MEG graduation standard: rigorous, future-ready skills, engaging learning environments, workforce-connected durable skills, and mastery with flexible timing. Traditional diplomas here and in other states measure seat time, not readiness. Requiring a demonstrated mastery of academic and durable skills raises the rigor of outcomes while allowing more flexibility in how and where students can learn. Sometimes we in this state and in other states, we substitute requirement or compliance for rigor. So we say, if you do all these actions, then you know. That doesn't mean you know. It just means you've done a checklist of action. So when we talk about raising the rigor by requiring that demonstrated mastery, again, that's a big increase in rigor, but it's more flexible in how and where you learn. Research does show that raising requirements boosts attainment, but it could have unintended consequences without support. Built into all of this is the necessity to understand that increased rigor does not just mean you increase rigor and then hope for the best. I'm going to quote Dr. Ph.D. I heard him give a speech about this. He said, for every 1 point of expectations, you have to have a point of support. So if it's 5 expectation point, you have to have 5 support points. And that is implicit in the MEG standard. We are not alone in this work. 30 states have updated their graduation requirements in the last 5 years. This is not surprising because most states updated their graduation requirements back when we did in the early 2000s. So those states are saying, well, these things are 20 years old. Maybe it's time for an upgrade. Ohio and Indiana have already done a lot of work on their diplomas, but Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin have not made those changes, although we are all in the mix. 15 states embedded career awareness into their graduation standards and created options for competency or mastery-based learning. And Hawaii, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Washington are all currently revising their standards. I like to point this out to say, what's the cost of Michigan not doing this? Well, further losing our position in the country. We're not alone in saying it's time to think about what kids need to graduate high school with and to do something about that. Virginia just recently updated their requirements and basically did a seat time flexibility, competency-based program that's much like a lot of what we're talking about in the MEG. More flexibility for students, flexible learning setting, blended course structures, and whatnot. It's nice to have another state out there that just redid their actual requirements so we can learn from them. We know we need more engaging learning environments for students. And on this one, I would say, I'm going to show you a bunch of data and surveys, but if you know a high school student and you've talked to them recently, they'd probably say something like, I don't really see the point of school. I don't know why we have to learn this. And some of that is teen angst. And I've got a couple of them at home. And so I know about the angst. But some of it is them really reflecting the fact that they don't actually understand why they're doing some of the things they're doing. And that's backed up by the national data. In a recent survey by the Walton Family Foundation, Voices of Gen Z, 50% of students did not agree that their coursework gives them the opportunity to do what they do best or challenges them in a good way. And just over 1 in 3 students did not feel they have learned anything interesting in the last 7 days. So about a third of students are saying, I didn't learn anything in the last 7 days that relates to my life. We have already said this point, but I want to keep coming back to it. Nearly 30% of the students were chronically absent from school in the most recent data. There's a couple reasons kids are chronically absent. One is structural reasons. It's hard to get there. They don't have transportation, parent support, illness, mental health. There's a lot of those reasons. But that's not the whole reason kids aren't coming to school. If kids are disengaged and don't see the point, they're not going to be motivated to come to school. So there's something in here too. I would guess, if I had to guess, about half of our chronic absenteeism could be dramatically helped by more engaging learning environments. I was just talking to somebody who at the school level did a shift to more of what the MEG is talking about. And the first leading indicator that they saw was a huge decrease in absenteeism and in behavior referrals. Once kids were more engaged in their learning, they were less likely to stay home and they were less likely to get in trouble. In the same Gallup Walton Family Foundation survey, less than 30% of students say they feel very prepared to pursue the career pathways in which they are interested. So how does the MEG help with engagement? It shifts us to a more personalized approach to learning. And there's a good body of evidence around personalized learning, indicating that those kind of approaches help increase engagement and outcomes. A lot of that peer-reviewed research is done on project-based learning, which is kind of a subset of personalized student-centered learning. There's really good evidence around project-based learning. It's been shown to have a significant positive impact on academic achievement, attitudes, and thinking skills. There's a nice meta-analysis on this that looks at a bunch of studies. So there's a good body of evidence around project-based learning. When you pull back a little to competency-based learning and mastery learning, which are all in the same bucket, this evidence base is emerging. But generally, students who are in mastery learning models perform better academically than peers in non-mastery models. That's in another peer-reviewed study. The research points out that It can be hard to study this at that high level of evidence because there's a lot of variation and implementation. We have to learn from the experiences of people who are doing the work. We have on our work groups people who have already done a shift towards student-centered mastery learning. I just want to shout out the work of the Future of Learning Council, which really has been digging into competency-based learning and what that could look like with a number of districts around the state. They have great evidence and examples of how this works for student engagement, a lot of good information that we can draw on when we're trying to craft statewide policy. Okay, the third component, workforce-connected durable skills. The evidence is really clear here. Students need more than academics alone for success after high school, both for education and employment pursuits. This comes from a mountain of research, a mountain of anecdotal evidence, a mountain of surveys. Career-focused education is an instructional approach that aligns academic learning with specific demands of the modern workforce. In the white paper, we go into some more detail on different studies, different pieces of evidence on this, but just a couple pieces of data to call out. In a recent U.S. Chamber of Commerce survey, 89% of hiring managers believe a real-life experience, so an internship, career tech ed, some on-the-job training, is more valuable than formal education. One of the big frameworks for these skills is the durable skills framework coming out of Pat Smith, America Succeeds. They studied thousands and thousands of job postings across all these industries and came up with this pretty elaborate but comprehensive framework that says these are the skills that people are asking for that matter in terms of employment, reskilling, moving between industries, thinking about the job you get out of high school or out of college, but also the job you get 10 years, 20, 30 years later. There's a whole mountain of evidence just in the building of this framework from America Succeeds. And then they're not alone. By our count, there's at least 12 frameworks for this out here that different people call on, point out. Our friends at the Michigan Learning Channel have been working on this for a while. There's the Patel for Kids framework for 21st century learning, the World Health Organization. MDE's Portrait of a Graduate is based in research. You could look at any of these and they all sit on this evidence base of why are these skills important? Why are they needed? And how do they help kids in their futures? Bringing it home a little bit, again, in 2024, we did an exercise with the Small Business Association of Michigan, and we just asked, what are you seeing? You're hiring graduates right after high school or after more training. What are you seeing? What do they struggle with? What do they need? And there was great consistency. Students struggle with time management, collaboration, communication, problem solving. None of them said, oh, kids can't read or kids can't do right. So I'm not trying to say we don't want to make sure our kids can read and do math, right? We want that. But the thing that comes up over and over is these durable skills. It's incredibly important that any new graduation standard explicitly makes space for these to be a valued part of student learning and a valued component of what they demonstrate that they can do when they leave, because that sets students up for success in their next step. The fourth component is this focus on mastery, but with more flexible timing and where and how you learn. It's this shift from did you sit through it to did you learn it? Many of you know the Carnegie Unit, right? The good old Carnegie Unit. It's a workhorse of American education from 100 years ago. It is under revision by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. The Carnegie Foundation says, well, seat time probably isn't equivalent to learning. And then there's evidence around mastery learning creating positive effects on achievement. There's a great deal of consistency in how these things look, despite the fact that they're almost 100 years apart. I'm not trying to say that kids shouldn't learn math or that classes don't matter at all, but it's that whole necessary but not sufficient. We do need academics, but it's not sufficient for the futures kids are going into. And this is a quote from Timothy Knowles, who is the Carnegie Foundation president, saying, we're at a key moment that demands transformation, and transforming how we educate young people must be at the top of the list. We need to learn through immersive experience. We learn from mentors, from experts in apprenticeships and internships, and from peers. We learn at highly variable rates depending on subject of study. So this idea that time and learning can be conflated at such a deep level as we see in our current system really needs to be changed. We agree, Timothy. We appreciate Carnegie advocating for that at the national level. Rounding the corner, I do want to take a few minutes and talk about reciprocal accountability and adequate and equitable funding. The focus of this was really on the research base underlying the graduation standards. And hopefully that's been helpful for you to get a taste of some of the data, evidence, and research that we've looked at and that we continue to look at as we build the graduation standard. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about these two topics. So remember that for a graduation standard, a high goal for what it means to go to school in Michigan, for that to succeed, you need to have adequate and equitable funding, and you need to have this sense of shared responsibility. So what is this term reciprocal accountability? How does it work? And how does it relate to continuous improvement? And I know accountability is like the biggest, scary word in all of education policy. I ran accountability at the Michigan Department of Education for a long time. So believe me, I've lived through the wars of accountability. I also think that makes me uniquely qualified to talk about why those don't work and what we can do in the future. We are very committed in the MEG to make sure we move past old models of punitive accountability, as well as this kind of set it and forget it education policy. Pass the law, yay, we're done. Oh, it's not working. Oh, well, I don't know who's to blame for that. Instead, have this true system of continuous improvement where it's about understanding what's needed, providing support, and where everyone in the system is responsible for success. What does current accountability get wrong? And please know, I'm not saying what is the MDE doing wrong with their accountability. That's not the point. They're doing a great job actually implementing the federal and state requirements. And for those of you who don't use the school index for continuous improvement, you should. It's got a lot of fine-grained, detailed data that could help you target your resources in your district. What does the current accountability frameworks that are in place federally and statewide, what does the thinking get wrong? No Child Left Behind really started this high-stakes, punishment-focused, punitive accountability model. Honestly, I'm just going to say it flat out. It was ineffective. People love to study this. This is a sweetheart of the econ of ed community, especially because it lends itself to it. 'Cause you can look at all this cool data and do all these diff and diff models. Very exciting. The good news is what we know is that this high-stakes accountability under No Child Left Behind produced at best some very modest short-term gains for some students. That's at best. We know it also led to a narrowing of curriculum. We used to teach a bunch of stuff. Now we hyper-focus on reading and math. That's not even working very well, right? Most importantly, it did not lead to a systemic transformation. It did not make the system different. It just piled on schools and districts who were already struggling under inadequate, inequitable resources, staffing concerns, a lot of reasons. Low performance is rarely, if ever, because people aren't trying. It's an outcome of systemic inequities and disinvestment and not the right support. But when you come in with a high stakes punitive model, it scares everybody and it doesn't produce the gains in the long term. And the gains that are produced are usually from some sort of gaming or manipulation. So accountability without supports leads to negative system reaction. The future of accountability in this state cannot look like the past. It has to be different. So what is reciprocal accountability? It is a system where responsibility for these outcomes is shared. Reciprocal accountability is distributed across every level of the system. Schools, districts, state agencies, higher ed, businesses, and families, rather than placed on educators alone. Effective accountability requires us to be transparent, to align our supports, and to keep that continuous improvement cycle across the system. This is what a full reciprocal accountability system would look like. There are metrics and support coming down, and then there's feedback coming back up the system. Business has a role. They're responsible to show up for the funding, and they're responsible to partner with education to make these things happen. Philanthropy, advocacy groups, parents. One of the things we talked about a lot in the MEG is what are the responsibilities of parents and how do we elevate parents, guardians, or other support structures for students? What's the community going to do? Remember what those teachers said in the design thinking. We want community support. Schools are part of a community network. In case you think that we just dreamed this up, which I would love to take credit for it, but this term was coined by Richard Elmore in actually back to 2002. It's recognition that systems fail because of a lack of systemic mutual responsibility. So in Michigan, for us to move toward a reciprocal accountability framework, it means every level and or group is accountable for student success. And for every increment of performance is expected, there's this equal responsibility to provide the capacity and resources to meet that expectation. I find this conversation is hard because the minute you bring it up, people are like, I remember the bad years and I remember the way this has gone poorly. And I agree. I remember it too. And I think that we have to acknowledge that we did it wrong in the past, but not get stuck there. Our kids deserve us to move forward with boldness and to ask questions about, is it going well? Why not? What is needed? And to try to move to a space where that conversation is not punitive or blaming, but is about getting better for all of our kids. To loop back, we know there's inequities under the merit curriculum. There's inequities in general in education, but we know not every kid gets the same merit curriculum experience. So we want to figure out how do we make sure that doesn't happen with the MEG. What does reciprocal accountability mean for equity? It's an opportunity to create explicit expectation of equitable opportunities for all students. That is another thing that accountability models get wrong in the last 20, 25 years. They never looked at the inputs, the equitable opportunities, what's happening coming in. They only looked at the outcomes. And then when there was a differential, it was easy to blame it on kids or schools or districts. We need to understand how the system is providing those opportunities, those supports. And again, if we were to hold ourselves accountable on that, we would find that we're not doing that either. So reciprocal accountability is a chance to really build in those supports, that equity, and then keep our eye on the data regularly to see if we're getting there. I did not forget investment. We cannot say it enough that when you talk about expectations or outcomes, it has to be paired with investments in knowledge, capacity, and support so educators can meet them. Elmore again pointed out educators aren't necessarily trained in continuous improvement during their prep programs. So you need support at the district and school level. Those high performing systems that we talked about, they spend on education. So pivoting to spending, I just want to set the record straight here. Shout out to our friends at the Education Policy Innovation Collaborative. They did an excellent study on this. There are lots of things in education where we're not sure. The evidence base is emerging. We're not sure about what's going on. Where are we in terms of spending and what does it mean? I think it's pretty clear. We are middle of the pack in terms of how we spend. We're about 27th in per pupil spending. We're about 22nd in fiscal effort. We're about 21st in terms of equity. But we have very inequitable distribution of support for special education, career tech education, and infrastructure. Again, from EPIC, here's the story of spending in Michigan. Per pupil revenues rose in the early 2000s, fell for 2 decades, and have just begun to recover. However, districts face much greater restrictions in how they use their revenues now than in the past, and they're expected to provide more services beyond instruction with the money that they're getting, but the funding for those services has been unstable and is in categoricals. So it's harder for districts to spend on the things that are needed in their district because they're much more restricted. In 2024-25, we ranked 44th nationally on average starting teacher pay, and we dropped there from 2021. If we want a top performing education system, we have to invest in our educators. If you want top talent, you have to pay top talent, you have to support them, you have to recruit them, you have to keep them. So when we talk about investments that are needed in Michigan and an adequate and equitable funding, we cannot forget that we need to make sure we're valuing and paying our educators and that we're really focusing on how money is getting to districts, what they're able to spend it on, and what the reciprocal accountability or transparency is around spending on evidence-based best practices, smart use of money instead of just more or less. Launch would love to see us move out of the debate about we need more, we need less, to we need to spend, and we need to spend smartly on the things that help us succeed as a system. This is Launch's approach and what we advocate for in terms of a healthy funding system. I don't like the reductive, we need this many billion more. I think that makes it too easy for people to say, well, now school aid was 23 billion and it used to be 19 billion, so we're done. That minimizes or underpowers the realities of what funding looks like. Healthy funding in our state would look like all of these things fully funded. I just want to call out, we do support the SFRC inflation adjusted per pupil level. We support it codified in statute. It's not currently codified in statute. It happens every year. We'd love to see it codified. We also very much support the weighted student funding work, the opportunity index, and the work that's going on right now to get those weighted funding weights specified in a different way in legislation. We're supportive of that, watching those who are leading the charge on that. We very much support the Michigan Special Education Blueprint and the investments that are needed there, as well as the dual enrollment investment. I'll just put a plug in. The state would do well to come up with a comprehensive plan for how we fund career tech education and career-focused education. We still are in the random acts of investment in that space, and I think we need a more comprehensive plan. So if anybody's super interested in that, give me a call. To wrap up, this is no one person's fault, but it is all of our responsibilities to fix it. This is a quote from one of our work group participants recently, and it's set hard with me and set hard with all of us in the work groups. I think this did not happen for any one reason. Pointing fingers doesn't matter, but it is all of our responsibilities to make this better. So why do we need the MEG? And why do we hope you will join in this work and help us get this across the finish line? It is the right solution and it is the right time. It is evidence-based. It's anchored in what educators say. It's anchored in a deep knowledge of policy of the state over the last 20 years. And it's time. We don't want to wait longer. We don't want to let our kids fall further behind. It is research-based and workforce aligned. It's tied to what the economy is doing, but it's based in the evidence as well. And it is community designed and student focused. I use the analogy a lot. We're holding the pen, but we are informed fundamentally by the voices of teachers, principals, superintendents, ISDs, other policy advocacy groups. We want to do this collaboratively. Good policy in Michigan needs to be collaborative and not competitive. We at Launch always set the biggest possible table we can. We do not believe in creating competitive policy. So when we're building, we want to talk to everybody and say, what do you know about this? What are you seeing? What are you learning? So we want to build the best possible graduation standards for Michigan students, and we want to do it with all of you. Please do follow. If you don't already follow us, reach out to us, be on our radar. We want to know you. We want to work with you and build this together.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Launch Michigan podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe on whichever platform you use to get your podcasts. To learn more about sponsoring an episode of the Launch Michigan podcast, please email communications@launchmichigan.org. This episode was hosted by Dr. Venessa Keesler, President and CEO of Launch Michigan, and produced by me, Emily Fishkin, our Senior Communications Manager. Join us in 2 weeks for another great episode on education policy, research, and reform in Michigan.